All right, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody. So, yet again, my favorite topic lately. I just can't seem to get enough of it, for better or for worse, and I think it's for better all in all aspects. We're gonna cover the absolute disaster theater show, whatever you want to call it, that is the current office of Nathan Hochman and Hydee Feldstein Soto. And we're going to talk about a couple of very specific examples showing just why they are completely incompetent, but worse off, why they have been bought out entirely by special interests. And they really have this very deep seated, utter resentment and hatred, not only just for the general public but especially Evangelinos. And their stories are bizarrely so similar. They're so eerily one-to-one copies of each other that it's no surprise, at least for myself anyway, being in LA, that these two in particular are in power and that they're in power at the same time. It makes perfect sense that two very hollow personalities, two very, what I would call essentially just puppets who serve their corporate masters, are at the helm of the prosecutor's office at both the city attorney's office and the district attorney's office. Which is to say, essentially, at the city and county level, you have all of LA being run by corporate overlords that wish nothing but the total eradication of any what little there is left of a middle class, of a social welfare, of a sort of upward mobility opportunity for Angelinos. And they want to do that in the best way that they know how, which is totally and deliberately neglecting their constituents and making it ever so boldly known publicly that they don't care, they will never care for the interests of the public, and that they're not here to serve you, a member of the public. That in fact they're here to do nothing but make your life as a fellow constituent much harder than it is, and much easier and much better for their corporate overlords. And in order to piece all this together, I'm going to give you the very real example that was the campaign run for office of the district attorney's office. And we're going to take a look at the stark difference between George Gascon and Nathan Hochman's campaign run. So if you don't know, long story short, George Gascon was the incumbent. He sadly lost his re-election race to Nathan Hochman. Hochman was sworn in last year around November 2024. And long story short, there's a great piece by the LAist, amongst many others, but this is probably the best one I've seen, where they do a deep dive into their campaign finances. And if you actually wanted to take a look for yourself, it's all public. It's very easy to see. But the stark difference in what George Gascon raised for his run and who that money came from versus the campaign finances for Nathan Hochman. So overall, Nathan Hochman far outraised George Gascon in the tune of millions. But the most interesting part, and you can see here, more than 7.2 million. This is how much George Gascon, how much Nathan Hochman raised. He raised more than 7.2 million for his campaign, and just a mere 605,000 for George Gascon. But that's really not the issue, right? You can raise as much money for your run for office, no problem. Certainly, that's within your rights. That's not an issue. The issue really is, who are these big donors And what are their special interests? What do they want as a return on their investment? What is it that they're looking to get back for all that sum of money? Well, we know that one of their biggest contributors was actually the LA County Sheriff's Union, which raised 1.35 million in contributions to back Nathan Hochman. Even more interesting as far as the history to Nathan Hochman and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department is the fact that Nathan Hochman was the lead defense lawyer for ex-Sheriff Leroy, aka Lee Baca. Lee Baca held tenure for decades overseen as the sheriff of LASD. In that tenure, he ran it very similarly to Soviet Russia. This guy had was such a totalitarian, authoritarian, what every stereotypical definition of what fits a absolute power-hungry tyrant who will stop at nothing to get his way. That is what Leroy Baca was. That is what his legacy entails, and that still is, to this day, what LASD, by and large, is. And not taking away from the current sheriff, Robert Luna, who has, in fact, admitted to the existence of deputy gangs, who is, to some extent, working with independent overseers like the Citizens Review Board, the Civilian Accountability Board for the LASD, and just the fact that he's admitted to the existence and the continued legacy of deputy gangs. Nathan Hochman does not care to hear any of that, and his client, which he purposely left his tenure as a prosecutor just to handle that case, and not only handle that case, but be the lead defense lawyer in that case when Lee Baca was finally and inevitably, some might say, was inevitably charged and convicted of very minor charges, really, at the end of the day, which was obstruction of justice because the FBI had planted a guy on the inside of the LA County jails to spy and video record and take notes on the heinous abuses committed as ordered by Lee Baca, as well as his undersheriff Paul Tanaka, and the many other layers of hierarchy, where essentially what was happening is, think of the most horrific stories that you've heard in those true crime YouTube series where inmates are just going at it with each other, and the COs and the handling of the sheriffs. That's all real life for LA County jail system. Lee Baca did some of the most disgusting and heinous acts in his power during his tenure as sheriff. And one of those was actually trying to, as he says, get rid of, but really translates to trying to kill and hide the body of the confidential informant, aka the guy who the FBI planted on the inside to record and report back to the FBI the acts that were going on and the abuses that were going on in the LA County jail system, which Lee Baca tried his damnedest to hide, and repeatedly stated that there was no existence of deputy gangs, that there was no outbreaks of violence committed by deputies onto those that were held in custody. And not only that, but both adults and children. And this is what Lee Baca had the audacity to continuously lie and say did not exist. Not only that, but orchestrated much of the abuse himself. And we heard from testimony that you can see for yourself on court transcripts where Paul Tanaka admitted that he was, who was the undersheriff, the right-hand man of Lee Baca, who was tasked with disseminating these orders to the rest of the deputies. Paul Tanaka admitted that he was a gang member, that he had a gang tattoo on his ankle, and that this is all part of the court record, that the existence of deputy gangs is very much real, and that it has its origins directly at the helm of the sheriff's office, the sheriff himself and the undersheriff, and that they knowingly and willingly did these acts, did not care for the repercussions, and went out so far out of their way to go and essentially threaten not only those that were trying to report on some of these abuses, but even had the audacity to send sheriff's deputies over to the house of the FBI agent who was literally tasked with investigating him. This is the kind of cold-blooded criminal that Lee Baca and was, and the legacy that he left in the LASD. And this is the corporate master that has completely bought out Nathan Hochman. And when you take a look at just the essence of who Nathan Hochman is as a person, you can very clearly see it in much of the tweets I've sent out with an actual copy of one of the trial transcripts where it was Nathan Hochman, aka the defense's turn to cross-examine witnesses, and the court was demanding to see a witness list from Nathan Hochman. And Nathan was trying to spin up some total nonsense, right? Total nonsense to say, well, I gave something, there was something put on a note somewhere, I think I gave it to the government. And the judge just stopped him. This is the first thing that is ever said, right? Very simple thing to do. You walk in, it's your day, it's your time for trial, it's your time to cross-examine. It's a very simple procedural step. The court needs to see, where is your witness list? I need to know who you're going to cross-examine, and I need to know before you actually call these witnesses. And this moron, well, he was trying to play one anyway, but it's hard to tell sometimes with these malicious actors like Nathan Hochman. It's hard to tell where it's playing versus actual incompetence. But he was trying to pull a fast one to say, we already filed one and we don't really need one. But that's just not how court works. So he was admonished for that. And the judge demanded to see a witness list, to which Hochman submitted one. And his strategy in trying to defend Lee Baca and his behavior, which is totally indefensible, but his strategy was to say, well, Your Honor, we don't have any witnesses because there is, in fact, nobody to testify to the abuses that are going on because the abuse doesn't exist. And that was his whole strategy. He pulled off one witness that was a deputy that was a known deputy that was a part of a gang, okay? And that was their witness to brown nose Lee Baca and say how great of a sheriff he was. And that was it. That was the whole strategy and goal. To say, look, Lee Baca is actually a stand-up guy. He's never done anything wrong. He doesn't do crimes. The LA County jail system is totally fine. There's nothing to see here. Everything that everybody has ever said about Lee Baca and the LA County jail system is total malarkey, and you shouldn't believe him. That was his strategy. Needless to say, it failed miserably, but that was the strategy. And when you realize that this is who Nathan Hochman is, you begin to understand just how deeply, deeply ill-positioned he is to ever have any sort of positive impact and actually care to do positive acts for the people of LA. He does not care for the well-being of Angelenos. He only cares to serve his corporate masters. One of the biggest being the LA County Sheriff's Department. The very same agency that we know for a fact, we know from all of the public hearings, repeatedly, time and time again, both at the Civilian Oversight Board for the LASD, as well as the LAPD Police Commissioners Board, we have heard for years now, time and time again, that overall violent crime and overall crime is down. even with fewer officers overall employed at both agencies, violent crime and overall crime is down and records down. Okay? Record lows. That doesn't mean that there aren't some crimes of moral turpitude and capital crimes occurring. Obviously, there are. But what it means is that overall, the public is not committing violent crimes. And when you take a look at who the owners of said violent crimes are, of these heinous capital crimes, assault of the sexual nature, assaults on children, just very violent and gory, brutal capital crimes, by and large, it's actually the state. By and large, you see the most heinous crimes being committed by government officials. By and large, what you see and get are law enforcement officers from both sides, LASD and LAPD, committing disgusting acts like domestic violence, repeated DUIs, and never paying the consequences for them. And I don't mean just a fine, but we have yet to see these officers lose their post license, a condition that they can actually fight for, and they're supposed to fight for as a prosecutor. All we see is complaints being banished within LAPD and LASD, and these officers going back right on the field. I have particular stories for LASD where the evidence is so overwhelming of officers committing just the most blatant of domestics, as well as assaults on of inmates. It's astounding that they're not getting prosecuted. Quite literally, it blows my mind at how either utterly incompetent, right? Because it can only be one or the other. You're either an extremely incompetent prosecutor that you can't even read evidence, or, and some people might say but I'll say or, you're totally bought out by your corporate overlords. The biggest one being the LASD, that you're not going to prosecute them. You're not going to prosecute one of your own. You won't hold them accountable. They'll do it again, and they'll get away with it. And this is the legacy of Nathan Hochman. This is who Nathan Hochman is. And when you actually read, okay, for those that care to read, okay, so like what policies does Nathan Hochman have, right? What things did Nathan Hochman actually run on? Well, we can actually see that very easily. We can actually see his website. And his website is meaningless. His policies were literally just repeal what George Gascon did. That's it. Nothing unique to his name. He stands for nothing. He's a hollow, empty shell for his corporate overlords to fill. And it's exactly what Hydee Feldstein Soto is. Hydee was a corporate lawyer specifically for banks her entire career. And Hochman was a short-lived prosecutor that literally left his job to defend one guy in particular, to buy their support. That's the purpose of why he did the defense of Lee Baca and Paul Tanaka, to buy the support of the LASD, right? To constantly run and spin the narrative that there's no gangs, that all is well, that Lee Baca was just a falsely accused man who had a long-standing tenure because people really loved and cared for him. But the reality is that the law enforcement and anybody else in the public were absolutely terrified of Lee Baca because they knew how much of a cold-blooded criminal he was, that they were too afraid to run against him because of the repercussions it would have. Where Baca was known for sending deputies over to his dissenters to harass the crap out of him. This is North Korea type shit. This is no different than the crap that North Koreans pull whenever anybody within their ranks ever has the audacity to make any sort of dissent. and have any sort of criticism of the government. This is who Nathan Hochman supports. This is who his corporate master is. And Nathan Hochman has nothing unique to his name at all. He has no special directives other than I repealed what Gascon had, but he has nothing else for himself. He has no policies, and he can't even submit a stupid witness list, but yet he's a prosecutor, right? He's a prosecutor. He stands for what? He stands for the interests of real estate developers. He stands for the interests of corrupt law enforcement. And he's guaranteeing, he's telling you to your face that he will let them get away with it, that he does not care about you. But more than that, he hates you. He does not wish to uphold any of the oaths that he took when he was sworn into office. He does not care to defend Angelenos. He will make sure that cover-up is the norm. And it's exactly why his office is having such a hard time hiring deputies as well for their office. It's why the Board of Supervisors hates the DA's office, just like it hates the LASD's office. It's why the Board of Supervisors continues to slash their budgets, because the only thing that they can do as the controllers of the money for the county to battle a criminal enterprise is you can only cut off the money supply. And it's worked very well for LASD. They're severely understaffed by over 30%, getting worse each year, exponentially worse. Nobody wants to work in the prosecutor's office either due to the high levels of corruption. This is who is in office right now for the district attorney. This is the legacy of Nathan Hochman, and he will make Los Angeles even worse. By and large, Angelenos are peaceful people. The most crime that you'll see are petty crimes, primarily 95% primarily due to poverty. And it's a systemic poverty that's created, that does not need to be there, that has no real justification for being there other than extreme corruption where public funds are not seeing the public's lives. They're instead seeing private special interest pockets. But let's not stop there. Why stop there? Let's take it up a notch. Let's take a look at some of the cases that Hochman has prosecuted during his tenure. Let's take a look at the Menendez brothers case. This one is one of the most shameful handlings of a case overall. Essentially, if you haven't kept up with it, his office, Hochman specifically, denied any sort of resentencing for the Menendez brothers. Under Gascon was actually ready to hear what was very clear public testimony corroborating the brothers' testimony to the horrific abuse that they experienced as children, ultimately being the reason for why they did what they did. Okay? And not just one or two or three people, but many, many people have come forward. And it's been very overwhelmingly on the side of the Menendez brothers. People who have no financial stake, no political stake at all, literally no dog in the game, no fight, no skin in the game. And it all corroborates the testimony that the Menendez brothers have given. And what we have here is essentially the imprisonment of two people that experienced horrific abuse at the hands of people that should have been their trusted caretakers, people that they had no way of escaping from because as children they just can't. And yet they got the punishment they received for finally snapping, right? A progressive area like Los Angeles, instead of institutionalizing them to some sort of long-term mental institution, right? If you want to talk about being concerned for their well-being, being that this is their only crime, And clearly, all of the evidence corroborates their claims, and much of it has come out in the last couple of years where various members connected to them by having no financial or political interests and gaining nothing from coming out and corroborating their story. It shows that there's merit for a resentencing. And Gascon was ready to do this. You had family members speaking out. You had documentaries. You had a whole social media movement. And we're going to talk about some of the specific examples. So, for example, there was Eric's letter to cousin Andy Kano. This is way back in December of '88. Okay, there was a habeas petition filed 2023, and the defense for the Menendez brothers cited a letter that Eric wrote to his cousin Andy, written months before the murders. Okay, months before, and it reads that they've been trying to avoid their father. It's still happening. It's getting even worse. They don't know when it's ever going to happen. They're afraid. He's told many times. He's told people hundreds of times. And nobody does anything. You have Roy Rossello, a former Menudo member. Okay, 2023. He too stated in very clear detail how their father, Jose Menendez, assaulted him when Roy was just 14 years old. You have their cousin, Diane Mullen, back in 2017, testified, okay, came out publicly. And she very clearly stated that Lyle had confided in her about the abuse since the moment that he was just 8 years old. Okay, she had known since he was just a child. Okay, and she had also shared that the brothers' mother, Kitty, was also told of the abuse, but chose not to believe it and throw it under the rug. And Gascon was ready to hear a resentencing, but instead of allowing that evidence, as you can see here by a tweet over by here in LA, that much of this testimony for the abuse that they clearly sustained and all of the public testimony that's come out ever since was never even heard on their case for consideration during their resentencing. It just wasn't. In fact, it was deliberately hidden, and the best that Nathan Hochman could come up with was that one of the brothers had a phone. And so somehow he makes the jump from, well, he has a phone to he's gang affiliated. Well, if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, anybody that actually understands the prison and jail system understands or should understand that the only way anybody could ever possibly get a phone inside is through the help of a deputy or a CO, right? Anybody that's in jail, that's the only way you can, it has to be smuggled in. It's not like the inmates themselves can just simply leave, walk to their local Walmart, get one of those payphones, and come back, and then that's just not how it works. So if we're going to go down that route, why didn't Hochman's office go and investigate just who from the deputies had a hand in the smuggling operation? Ensured that the phone would get to one of the brothers. Why isn't that person being prosecuted? Why is it exclusively just on the shoulders of the brothers to bear as a burden? And why does that count so heavily? This is the legacy of Nathan Hochman. A guy that's so deep in the pockets of his corporate masters that he will do anything. And it's why he's making his run of media left, right, front, and center. He's going on just about the most obscure podcast runs, doing interviews left and right. And it's because they want to reelect him. He clearly has aspirations. ideally of a higher office. I doubt he'll get it, primarily because he just doesn't have the makings of a varsity athlete. Truth be told, he has no unique identity. There is no such thing as a who is Nathan Hochman. There's nothing there. Nathan Hochman is whoever his corporate overlords say he is. That's all he will ever be. That's what he's chosen in life, and he's content with that. In this iteration, he's chosen to be everything that the LASD is telling him to be, which is allegedly tough on crime, but literally not prosecuting the heinous acts by deputy gangs. And he just doesn't care. He just doesn't care. And he's making it very well known. So this is a legacy that Nathan Hochman unfortunately continues to leave. I doubt it'll ever change. And he works hand in hand, of course, with Hydee, Feldstein, Soto. And what's the connection here really at the end of the day? Well, it's that both of them are this empty, hollow shell of a corporate puppet that does the bidding of whatever campaign financier tells them to do. Hydee has no interest in helping Angelenos. Hydee will never prosecute any city official for negligence or the fraud that they're clearly committing with all of the public funds that are meant for homeless people, and never actually seeing said people at all, and in fact seeing directly the pockets of private special interests and all the cronies affiliated with Bass and all of the businesses that she has a hand in and that her deputies have a hand in. Hydee will never go after any of them. And similarly, neither will Hochman. And the only thing he has to cling on as far as Hochman is this false narrative saying that, well, he is tough on crime. Just look, he charged current price with new charges. Those charges were already pending, and Gascon had already talked about how he was waiting for filing those new fraud and embezzlement charges. That's not Hochman's doing. That's the legacy of George Gascon. Gascon was the first one to actually prosecute current price. The first DA to go after the rampant fraud and embezzlement that's going on at the city level. Gascon had the courage to do that. That's not Hochman. Hochman is only... he basically is just picking up the final 2% that Gascon had already done for him. And the only reason he did that is because he can have a narrative to spin and say, look, I do care about crime. Look, I filed these charges. They're my charges. But they're not. It's the work of George Gascon. And so this is who you have at the helm of the both prosecutors' office at the city and county levels. You have two corporate puppets that will do whatever real estate developers tell them to do, that will do whatever law enforcement unions tell them to do, because they're bought and paid for. They don't care about your rights. And in fact, Hydee shamefully admits very, very publicly, and she was confronted about it. Even her own political backers are starting to hate Hydee. And you can see it at the Sherman Oaks Homeowner Association interview, where she was confronted outright by her own host, who challenged her outright and said, we hate how corrupt your office is. We hate how you're letting go all this rampant fraud and abuse in city government, and you're not doing a damn thing to prosecute any of it. And the only thing she could do is backpedal and say, well, my office is clean, and that's just not true. And furthermore, she admitted that as part of her advocacy, she's trying to limit. What is she trying to do? She's trying to limit liability payouts because she doesn't believe that victims should get what a jury believes they should get when they experience horrific abuse at the hands of LAPD or negligence by the hands of LASD. She just doesn't believe that they should be entitled to any of that money. She believes, as we clearly saw from the Judge Carter case, the Alliance v. City of Los Angeles, she and her cronies believe that how dare you even criticize the city? Who are you to have the audacity to criticize the city? Who are you to even conceive of the thought, let alone the act of verbalizing how disgruntled and frustrated you are with the corruption in the city? That's the real story of Hydee. That's the real story of Nathan Hochman. And these are the two morons at the helm of the prosecutor's office. Angelenos are not safe with Hydee and Hochman. People, this whole aura of fear that they're trying to instill, I actually agree with it. But the origins of that fear are not from what they're saying it is. It is a very dark time in LA, but it's not because it's the people of LA committing violent acts. It is because the offices of Hochman and Hydee are allowing their government officials to run rampant, committing fraud and disgusting capital crimes left and right without being prosecuted. It is not safe in LA because of Hochman and Hydee. And that's a damn shame because they swore an oath not only to the Constitution, but to protect Angelenos, and they're failing miserably at it. And so we'll end my episode with there. We'll see if anybody has any questions. And if not, we'll call it quits. All right, let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you haven't already, shout out to the LAist. I got this, talked to some of their reporters actually at the Judge Carter case. Surprisingly, there was one LA Times guy, and he didn't even stay there for the whole trial that was going on for the whole 2 weeks. But LAist had reporters there the entire time, so that shout out to the LAist for that. Let's see here. All right. I don't think we got anything. So, all right. See you guys next time. Appreciate it. Thanks. And we'll end it there. Peace out.